In today's show, I'm going to be talking with David Ramil from Locked On Heat about the Miami Heat's moves in the offseason, plus the pending investigation into the Kyle Lowry acquisition. Let's get stuck into it.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another show. I am going to be talking with David Ramil today about Miami and their off-season moves and the pending potential tampering charges. Before I get into that, I've got to tell you that today's show is brought to you by StatHero. Did you know that 85% of people who play daily fantasy sports lose? Is it really that surprising? The game is rigged against you. You're playing against thousands of other lineups, not to mention experts who have more tools and more time. You don't stand a chance. So I'm introducing StatHero. It's the first ever daily fantasy sportsbook that puts the player in control and winning within reach. Here's how it works. StatHero shows you their lineups and dares you to beat them. It's you versus the house in a head-to-head fantasy matchup. You name your stakes, winner take all, you have the advantage. StatHero is showing you their lineups ahead of time. No one else does that. You are in total control. StatHero is DFS the way it is meant to be, one-on-one. So play StatHero now and change the odds. Go to stathero.com/lockedon. You can sign up free, and right now you can get 3 times back on your first play. They are giving you a 300% match. That is unheard of. Go to stathero.com/lockedon. stathero.com/lockedon. So let's now bring in, let's do it. Let's bring him in. The host of the Locked On Heat podcast, David Ramil, is here. David, welcome to Locked On NBA. And firstly, let's start with, I guess, some more positive things. The Miami Heat made some key moves this offseason, bringing in Kyle Lowry, bringing in PJ Tucker, bringing back Victor Oladipo on a minimum contract. They were a team obviously unceremoniously swept out of the playoffs in the first round. Yeah, how much better do these moves make them? Are they a tier 1 title contending type team?
I don't think so. Not quite yet. It could all work out that way, but there are questions about Lowry and Jimmy Butler as, they continue to age, how well this team meshes together. They put together what seems on paper anyway, like a much improved defense. And Lowry certainly brings an element of playmaking and ability to draw free throws that was missing with Goran Dragic or anybody else filling that point guard slot. Overall, I'd say they've made significant improvements, but I fall just shy because they don't have the same kind of talent as a Brooklyn or even the kind of proven experience of a Milwaukee. So I don't see them as a top tier contender, but they're pretty close.
Yeah, I think that's how I see it as well, in that sort of second grouping, with, say, the Sixers, the Celtics, the Hawks, the Knicks, all that sort of group. They probably can establish themselves a bit higher than some of those teams, but in that group is where I have them. Before we get into all the Lowry stuff, PJ Tucker, obviously is a huge part of what many successful teams have done, from the Rockets through to the Bucks winning the title this year. He did, I think, drop off a little bit in some of the playoff matchups, and you talk about age, he is 36 already. The Heat had that success in the bubble with the Jay Crowder playing at the 4, more of a stretch 4. Now, PJ Tucker, great shooting corner threes, but we wouldn't call him any sort of offensive threat at all. He is, I don't know if he's a non-shooter, if that's the best way to describe PJ Tucker, but having him and Bam playing the 4 and the 5, which appears how they're going to be running things a lot of the time, is that a bit of an offensive impediment, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty legitimate concern. Unless Bam or Jimmy start all of a sudden spacing the floor, there's going to be a pretty sizable lack of shooting on that front, that starting rotation there. Kyle has to hit at such an incredibly high level. Duncan, obviously an elite shooter, but we've seen how teams can target him and kind of marginalize what he's able to do. And if that's the case, then all of a sudden you've got a real lack of spacing out there. I'm curious to see what Eric Spoelstra does to add some kind of level of dynamism here that we haven't seen, because again, you do have some lack of shooting there, so it's got to be dependent on, I don't know, maybe more off-ball movement, trying to get the ball to some cutters, using a lot of screens and things, that sort of things, that the kind of innovations we've seen from Spoelstra in the past when he does have shooting. I mean, look, he built a pretty successful franchise around a non-shooter and Dwayne Wade, so I'm sure he could probably fix something there, but it's a different NBA nowadays, obviously, and so I am concerned about Tucker's lack of shooting. They bring in Markieff Morris, that's not a significant help either. So I just don't know exactly what's happening there with that front court. Although you could make a case for the guy they just recently signed, Omer Yurtseven. He's a nice shooter at 7 feet tall. That might be pinning hopes on somebody who doesn't really have any kind of NBA experience whatsoever, but at least you have a floor spacing big on the roster.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Yurtseven, who was absolutely dominating in the Utah Summer League. He averaged 20 and 15 or something crazy along those lines. Of course, it is Summer League, but he has found himself with an NBA contract. So congratulations to him. Before we get into the Kyle Lowry stuff, Victor Oladipo back. Yeah, obviously he was expecting a huge payday, big max contract. Injuries have ruined him over the last 2 to 3 years, and he just has not looked himself. He's pushing and forcing things too much. And then he had to have another surgery on his quad. David, how much are we actually going to see Victor Oladipo play this season?
Not much. I wouldn't expect it. I've seen prognosis anywhere from December to March, and if that's the case, he might be in time just to see, make a contribution during their playoff run. So it's going to be, at this point, I think the priority for the Heat and for Victor would be to get 100% healthy, or as close to that as he's ever going to get from this point in his career. Because obviously we thought he was close to healthy. He thought he was close to healthy, and apparently that was not the case. And, obviously he wasn't available for Miami during their playoff run, as short as it was. It would have been nice to have somebody to keep Drew Holiday from going off, or having the or even Bryn Forbes, who outscored Jimmy Butler. So it's good to have Victor back there. I think for him, it makes a lot of sense to come back to an organization that he's long been linked to, that he's always seen himself as being a part of. He models a lot of his game after Dwayne Wade. Obviously, there's a Tom Crean connection at the collegiate level. So I think he's always wanted to be part of the Miami Heat culture for whatever it's worth. And so now he gets another opportunity to kind of just recover. He knows the system. He knows the coaching staff. He knows what his role will be here. And if he can contribute, at some point during the playoff run, then you can bring in a high-level defender off the bench, another guy who can create his own shot, who can draw free throws, who can occasionally space the floor too. So it's a nice addition, and it's a very low-risk one considering the amount of money he's being paid. So it's a good opportunity for him. And, with a one-year deal, if he's healthy and he can find a way to contribute, then he can still enter into free agency next year and maybe, field some more high-value offers.
What the big story, I guess, surrounding Miami and, of course, Toronto and Chicago and New Orleans is the investigation into tampering. Let's focus on the Miami side of things, because that's what you talk about here, David. And we're talking about them acquiring Kyle Lowry in a sign and trade, of which the details were reported 24 hours in advance of free agency officially being able to commence, the details were that Miami had perhaps cleared enough cap space to potentially look into doing this deal, that maybe what they would be looking at would be something along the lines of a framework that remarkably turned out to be exactly the same as how it ended up being. So, give our listeners an overview of what, if they are found guilty of tampering, what the potential ramifications are for the Miami Heat. Can the trade be taken back and they can't execute it? Can Kyle Lowry have to go to a different team? Like, what can end up happening here?
It's potentially that's the case. I think Bobby Marks of ESPN has said that he finds it very unlikely. He's been on that receiving end of the investigation as well when he was in the front office. And so he's aware of what transpires. What helps Miami is the fact that they actively pursued him many years ago. I think in 2014, they also actively pursued him this past season. Well, also in a trade right at the trade deadline. So maybe they had already discussed the parameters of a trade at that point in time. So that kind of helps them. Now the league will check into personal emails. They'll check text messages, phones, records, and things of that sort. And if they find any wrongdoing, then obviously Miami can be penalized. If that's the case, they could void the trade, however unlikely that might be. I don't know what happens then, because that kind of really throws a huge monkey wrench into all of free agency, because Kyle was one of the first dominoes to fall there. From Miami's perspective, they don't have a plan B. I guess they'd welcome back Goran Dragic and have to find a way to, incorporate him back into the lineup. Again, if that seems unlikely to happen. So my feeling is that if they are penalized, if they are found guilty, then maybe a future draft pick or some kind of other compensation will be included there. But I guess Mark Cuban wasn't satisfied with 2011. He had to complain rather loudly to the league about the whole deal, because that smacks of Cubes getting really upset that they weren't able to land Lowry. Yet again, clearing all this cap space for nothing.
Just a subtle shot there at Mark Cuban. Love it, David. David, if you want to hear what David's got to say about other Heat moves and the outcome of this tampering investigation into Miami, he's going to cover it for us all over on Locked On Heat. David, thank you for coming on Locked On NBA with me.
Always a pleasure.